The outline for this evening is just, again, to review the ins and outs of the grant. This is a grant, it's not a gift, and therefore all grants come with guidelines and compliance requirements. So I will review those with you and discuss, since this is a federal grant, there are some very specific eligible uses for the funds and also some things that are ineligible that we cannot consider for using these funds. I also want to tie the ARPA grant in with some of the other activities that will be happening in the balance of this year and into the new year that directly affect how we might allocate these funds. And at the end, toward the end of the show, I will review very quickly the survey that some of you completed online and answer your questions as we have time to do. So Egremont has been awarded a grant of some $360,000 through the American Rescue Plan Act. That law went into effect in March and became effective this past May. The purpose of ARPA is to provide direct support to governments across the country to help mitigate the effects of the COVID pandemic. The U.S. Treasury has initially issued an interim final rule and some initial compliance and reporting requirements that have not yet been finalized. The full amount of the grant, the $360,000, will not be received all in one lump. We have received half the money already. $180,000 is in the bank, so to speak. And the second half of the money will be arriving probably next summer. We have time to allocate these monies for particular uses. We have through calendar year 2024 to actually allocate the funds, and we have to actually have expended all of them by the end of 2026. Our first annual report to the U.S. Treasury was to have been at the end of this month. That is one reason that we scheduled this session, this initial outreach session now, because we wanted to at least say that we had made contact with our residents, and we've let you know that this is happening. But we had learned last week that the first report is now due in 6 months, in April of 2022. So I have to admit to having breathed a sigh of relief because I didn't think we had really much to report, but I also felt that it was imperative to begin outreach and discussion with all of you to let you know how this would work for us. As I mentioned, all federal grants come with strings attached, and they want to make sure that we comply with all oversight rules and controls on our municipal level. We also have to follow regular procurement procedures, and any allocation that we do eventually make comes with the kind of the burden of detailing very specifically with statistics and so on, metrics, why we made the decisions that we made and how those decisions directly tied to the experience of the pandemic in Egremont. So we only have to put in an annual report because we are a smaller community. Other larger municipalities have an added burden of reporting quarterly and have to come up with lots of different plans ahead of being able to spend the money. It's important for you to understand that the ARPA grant monies have to be spent in 4 eligible categories. Now, granted, those categories, which I will detail in a moment, are pretty broad, but they have to, the funds must go to those who are most impacted by COVID, and separately, we are allowed to use the funds to upgrade historically underfunded critical infrastructure, namely water, wastewater, or sewer, if we had any, culverts, stormwater, and even surface waters that might be impacted from pollution, if any there be. So again, 4 categories, and I will detail those here. The first category, and this actually could be 2 categories because it is fairly broad, is public health. This is an ongoing pandemic, and the federal government says that they understand that we're still grappling with it, both as a community and providing government services to all of our residents who are still potentially affected. The funds will also cover negative economic impacts, including assistance directly to households or businesses, nonprofits, or of those industries who have documented negative economic impacts that have been incurred between March 3rd, 2021 and December 2024. In other words, this is not to reimburse us for last year, even though that was a pretty severe shutdown that we all lived through. This is meant to be forward thinking, forward planning money for us to take what we've learned from the pandemic and bring it forward. How can we provide services to residents better? The second category of funding eligibility is to provide premium pay to essential workers who are most at risk of exposure to the COVID virus. The third provision eligible for funding is the provision of government services to the extent that the budget has been impacted negatively. Similar to what we just saw for businesses and individuals, likewise, our town government, if they've had a fiscal hit, if you will, they must document that loss, and some of these funds might go to making up for that. However, I have learned from the select board and other people who mind your money that, in fact, the town did not experience a loss. So this category doesn't really apply. Unless your entire budget has been impacted, then this category would not apply to us. And the fourth category eligible for ARPA funds is, as I mentioned, critical infrastructure, drinking water systems, wastewater, stormwater, and broadband, and the provision of broadband. ARPA funds may not be used for the following uses: to make up for budget reserves, to offset property or local tax rates that some consider maybe too high. We cannot make additions to pension plans. We can't service debt with this money. We can't satisfy legal judgments. And we cannot offset line item losses or reimburse line item losses. Only total annual budget loss can be considered for funding, as I mentioned a moment ago. So as you see, it's pretty specific about what we can and cannot use the money for. And I'm going to detail a little bit. I'll give you some examples for each of the categories highlighted. As I mentioned, our first report is not due until next April. In my mind, that gives us kind of extra time to consider. Actually, we have quite a while to consider what we use these funds for. We actually have until 2024 to fully allocate the monies. Whenever possible, the other part of my job, aside from kind of developing requests for funding from the various departments and committees and boards, is to look for other grant funds with which we can leverage to the utmost these ARPA funds, so that our town budget is not impacted very heavily. And these ARPA grant the normal process for allocating grant funds is through select board meetings. And since this is a grant, it is anticipated that during the normal course of business, every department, board, or committee can simply come to the select board meeting at a specified date and time and make their request for consideration for ARPA funds. So at the moment, that seems to be what other municipalities in Berkshire County are doing. And, I see no reason to do, there doesn't seem to be any requirement to do anything other than that. This is my favorite slide of the deck, because don't forget, I am a planner. The timing for the arrival of this ARPA grant aligns perfectly with 3 recently received grants that will impact not only the present, but the future of Egremont. Those 3 are critical in that they will set the frame for allocating not only ARPA funds, but certainly some of the activities of your government from the years ahead. The first is the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant, which was received sometime late last summer, I think. And that is just getting started. There is a appointed 3-person MVP committee, and I believe they've invited others to participate. And that, for those of you who are not familiar, is a climate change plan, but it ends up being an all hazards plan, because a municipality is able to add any hazard that they feel would impact their municipality. So in our case, we might certainly include COVID or global health pandemics as a potential threat, because obviously we're living through that. And while not directly related to climate change, you have the flexibility to add additional items that you want to deal with within this plan. The grant that was received for MVP is a planning grant, and the process takes the better part of a year. And as I said, it just got started. They had a meeting last month, and all of the meeting agendas and Zoom recordings are going to be on the website for all of these. Additionally, the master plan, the planning board received a grant to do a master plan, which to a planner is the bananas. That is like the biggest plan that codifies not only residents' vision of the Egremont that they have now and want to see in the future, but it provides you a template for growth and development in a rational way that aligns with your community priorities. That grant was received, and the planning board just had a meeting last week where they are going to begin interviewing consultants to lead that process for the community. And thirdly, the Open Space and Recreation Plan, a grant was given to the Conservation Commission, also very recently, about the same time as the master plan came in. And that one is sort of self-explanatory. It not only assesses what you have now in terms of open space and recreational facilities, but it will help you outline where you want to go with those facilities. And seeing as how French Park received a lot more use during this past year and a half, just for safe social distancing, for meetings, for, fun things to do for the community in a safe way. That type of thing is what this grant and plan is meant to include. Each of these 3 requires extensive public participation, and it will include multiple meetings, detailed surveys. It will allow you to have input to the town's goals, priorities, and to map out an action plan for going where you want to go over the next few years. I urge all of you who are attending this evening to keep this on your radar, because you will be asked to participate. And certainly those meetings will all be posted prominently on the website. And the best part is that once you complete these plans, it makes Egremont eligible for additional funding to start to implement the plans. So you got to do the planning before you do the implementation. But I can tell you, your master plan hasn't been updated since 2003, and it is now woefully out of date. And it certainly does not encompass, I know, where you want to go. So I can't urge you more strongly than to say, please participate in as many of these as you can, because we need your ideas, we need your voice, and we certainly want your participation. So let's talk a little bit about the quick survey that we posted on the town website and sent out through the newsletter. Really, this survey was for orientation to ARPA. It includes all of the categories that are actually somewhere in ARPA, the legislation. But really, it was just the survey itself was just to capture what's on the top of your mind in terms of things that interest you and what you notice about Egremont. So this wasn't really meant to make any decisions with. It was simply a way to engage you in this conversation and to make you aware of the critical need for you to participate in these related planning exercises that are going to be happening. And also we started using SurveyMonkey, and we wanted to see how easy it was to use because, as you may know, your town website, among other things, is being worked on. And SurveyMonkey is very easy to integrate a link to any survey that the town is going to undertake. And there'll be plenty of them in the future. So I think we did capture your attention, and I hope I'll be able to answer your questions as we go ahead. So here are the results. When asked, there were 120 total respondents to the survey, and not surprisingly, the majority of you who answered were over the age of 65. But what that tells me is that we have the responsibility to go after the younger age groups to get them engaged in this process. That is imperative for you to have well-rounded plans that are representative of your goals and desires for the future. The second question on the survey was, are you a resident? And 92 of you, I believe, were full-time residents. 23 or 4 were part-time residents. And a few outliers included one person who works in town but lives elsewhere, and 2 other folks who are more than part-time, whatever that means. But they are one of them was in the process of moving here. So again, we probably have an effort to reach out to other folks here, because there are probably more part-timers than actually responded, and other folks who work in town or have a business here who may not live here that we want to engage. So the top 5 top of mind responses we got to the survey include affordable housing, more than half of you, more than half of 120. And now 120 people is about 8% of the town's total population. So not a majority. So affordable housing is top of mind. Expanding broadband access and affordability is also important. I know that's an ongoing process with the tech committee, and I know they're looking into affordability right now, and I expect there'll be some news on that front shortly. Work to eliminate food insecurity, both in Egremont and supporting the regional food network that provides the nourishment to people. That's very important to 42% of you. Disaster and severe weather prep and pollution mitigation. This, folks, is MVP. This is municipal vulnerability preparedness. So fortunately, we have an immediate avenue for you to participate if you're concerned about these issues. And number 5, which was a nice addition, is to support small business development. And I think even though it wasn't a huge number that voted for that option, I think that is something that we need to explore more fully and see, what that really means for Egremont, both current businesses and those that might be developed. I will quickly go through the rest of the results just for your information, because you might be curious. Improving public safety and water, wastewater, and stormwater. These are, again, right in ARPA. So undoubtedly there will be some requests that might be related to these items. And certainly infrastructure, since it's called out in the Act, will definitely get some attention and money. Support health and wellness services for older adults. That makes sense in Egremont because so many of you are mature. To, again, another business related, supporting work opportunities and training for residents, for our younger residents particularly. So this is something we want to look into and certainly include all of these in any of the upcoming planning operations that we're going to be doing. And to support nonprofits and social services. Again, 21% of you thought that was important. The rest of the responses, other infrastructure, which was not specified, but certainly you've got some, so we can look into that. Mental health and substance abuse, 16%. Health and wellness for younger people, 14%. Direct household assistance, 13%. Economic development, 12%, and the other two, 9% and 8% respectively. Tourism and regional partnerships. So nothing earth-shattering, but certainly I wanted to assure you that all of this information will be captured. I will put it on the town website. I will also share it with the relevant departments and committees and make sure that all of these topics are dealt with somehow, whether it's from ARPA or from one of the other plans.